Hi everyone. Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic and powerful paintings of the Baroque era, Judith slaying Holofernes by Artemisia Gentileschi. One of the most striking and brutal scenes of the Baroque era depicts the victory of a young female heroine over a ruthless general. Italian painter Artemisia Gentileschi's Judith beheading Holofernes has secured a powerful place in art history. Gentileschi painted this scene at two different points in her career, on two separate canvases, the first completed around 1612 to 1613 in Naples Museo di Capodimonte, and the second around 1620 in Florence Uffizi Gallery. This work is a masterpiece, whose narrative and symbolic language are deeply enriched by both the artist's personal story and the cultural context of her time. In this video we explore Artemisia Gentileschi's life and art, the story of Judith, and how Artemisia interpreted Judith through two different paintings in a comparative analysis. Art can capture not only beauty, but also humanity's darkest and most violent moments. The story depicted in this painting comes from the Book of Judith, an apocryphal text of the Old Testament. Judith is a beautiful and devout Jewish widow living in the city of Bethulia. The city has been besieged by Holofernes, a general of King Nebuchadnezzar of Assyria, and is on the verge of surrender. To save her people, Judith devises a daring plan. Together with her maid, Abra, she enters the enemy camp and captivates Holofernes with her beauty and wit. After he invites her to his private tent and becomes drunk at a banquet, Judith uses his own sword to decapitate him. Placing the severed head in a sack, she and her maid return to the city. The enemy army loses heart, and Bethulia is saved. This story of a seemingly weaker woman defeating a ruthless tyrant became a popular subject in the Baroque era. During the Counter-Reformation, the figure of Judith also took on allegorical significance. Catholics saw her punishment of Holofernes as the victory of true faith over its enemies such as Protestantism or the Ottoman threat. Indeed, Judith's prayer as she kills Lord, God of all might, support what I do. Grant success to my plan to crush the foes who come against us, was embraced in the 17th century almost like a battle cry. In the Middle Ages, Judith was often portrayed modestly as a prefiguration of the Virgin Mary. In the Renaissance and Baroque periods, she came to resemble the huntress Artemis, taking on a more warrior-like identity. Thus, Judith became a symbol of both piety and female courage. Behind every powerful painting stands an even more powerful story, and Artemisia Gentileschi's life is one of resilience, talent, and defiance. Artemisia Gentileschi was one of the few women painters to gain fame in the male-dominated Baroque era. Her father, Orazio Gentileschi, was a well-known painter who trained Artemisia in his workshop from an early age. The dramatic light tan shadow technique, chiaroscuro, and realistic style of the innovative master Caravaggio left a profound impact on Orazio and indirectly on Artemisia as well. Indeed, Caravaggio-like realism can be observed in Artemisia's early major works, such as Susanna and the Elders and her later Judith paintings. The most traumatic event in Artemisia's life occurred in 1611, when she was raped by her father's associate Agostino Tezzi, followed by the scandalous trial in 1612. Even under torture, the young Artemisia refused to retract her testimony, and Tazzi was found guilty. This event deeply shaped Artemisia's later artistic career and the interpretation of her works. Many art historians, particularly early feminist scholars, have interpreted Judith beheading Holofernes as a visual expression of Artemisia's revenge against her trauma. Judith's strong and determined stance seems almost to embody Artemisia's own voice and fury. According to legend, Artemisia even modeled Judith's face after herself and gave Holofernes the features of Tazzi, adding a personal dimension to the painting. Through art, she created a scene of catharsis where justice was carried out. On the other hand, modern researchers emphasize that limiting Artemisia's art solely to her trauma diminishes her, since many artists of the period painted similarly violent and dramatic scenes. Indeed, Artemisia embraced the bloody and tension-filled Baroque aesthetic just as much as her contemporaries, from Caravaggio to Valentine de Boulogne. Yet Artemisia's depictions of Judith stand apart for their strength and sincerity through the lens of a female perspective. In Gentileschi's painting, Even the smallest details intensify the violence and gravity of the scene. Artemisia Gentileschi's Judith captures the most critical moment of the event. Judith and her maidservant Abra have pinned Holofernes down on the bed at the very instant they drive the sword into his neck. At the center of the canvas, Judith is seen gripping Holofernes' hair tightly while plunging the sword into his throat with all her strength. As Holofernes' large muscular body writhes on the white sheets, the two women's arms interlock to restrain him. The composition is intensely dynamic and charged. Bodies, arms and legs intertwine to form a knot of struggle. Gentileschi's use of powerful light and shadow contrast, chiaroscuro, sharply draws the scene out from the dark background, heightening its dramatic impact. The light falls on Judith's and Abra's faces and arms, while illuminating parts of Holofernes' body and casting the rest in shadows, suggesting a symbolic division between the radiant light of good and the darkness of evil. A striking detail in Artemisia's composition is that both women have rolled up their sleeves. The cuffs of Judith's and Abra's dresses are pulled back to their elbows. This detail suggests that they have prepared themselves, as if for an ordinary household, chore only here. The task at hand is killing an enemy for the sake of their homeland. The facial expressions of the two women convey absolute determination. Judith's brows are furrowed, while Abra's youthful face shows intense concentration. For them, this is a duty to be carried out, there is no hesitation. Holofernes, on the other hand, is depicted in a desperate attempt to escape, pressing his body against Abra in a final struggle. With his powerful arm, he appears to clutch at Abra's garment or neck in a frantic effort to push her away. Yet this effort is futile. Judith's sword has already pierced his throat, and dark red blood begins to stain the white sheets. Holofernes' eyes stare into emptiness, his mouth half-opened, eyes that evoke the very moment of death's arrival. Gentileschi's interpretation carries striking differences when compared with other works depicting the same subject. This contrast is especially evident when set against Baroque master Caravaggio's Judith. In his 1599 version, Caravaggio portrayed Judith as a timid, somewhat distant young woman. While Holofernes cries out in desperation, Judith's face reveals an expression of disgust and hesitation. Moreover, in Caravaggio's scene, the maidservant Abra is depicted as an old woman who remains passive, standing aside with a bag in her hands, waiting to receive Holofernes' severed head. Artemisia, however, presents an entirely different approach in her Judith. Both women are young and strong, and both are fully engaged in the act. Abra is not merely an assistant, but almost an accomplice. They subdue Holofernes together. The figure's arms and bodies even form a diagonal arrangement within the composition, adding extra dynamism to the scene. Artemisia takes Caravaggio's sense of dramatic conflict and pushes it further, emphasizing physical strength and determination. As a result, the viewer is placed almost as a third witness inside the tent, directly observing the bloody moment. Gentileschi uses extreme contrasts of light and dark tenebrism to isolate the figures against a black background. The light falls directly on Judith and Abra, elevating them as divine agents of justice and highlighting the horror of the scene. The Florence version shows a shocking jet of blood spurting from Holofernes' neck. This arc has even been linked to Galileo's studies of parabolic motion, suggesting Artemisia's awareness of contemporary science. Judith kills Holofernes with his own sword. In the second version, the blade is perfectly vertical, visually resembling a cross and reinforcing the theme of divine justice. Artemisia Gentileschi's first treatment of the theme Judith beheading Holofernes took place around 1612 in Rome, painted when the artist was only 19 or 20 years old. The work was a testament to her talent and boldness. The canvas, measuring approximately 125 centimeters, is today housed in the Capodimonte Museum in Naples. Since this first version followed immediately after Gentileschi's 1612 trial, some commentators believe the violence depicted may be connected to her personal emotions. Indeed, early critics interpreted the painting as a form of revenge, an artistic act of retribution by a young woman against the brutality she had endured. The Naples version presented an extraordinarily striking scene for its time. Depicted with complete directness, While many painters chose to portray Judith calmly posing after the beheading, Artemisia depicted the very moment of execution. This choice confronts the viewer with the bloody reality of the event, unfiltered. Even in this first painting, the struggle is dynamic and forceful. Judith and Abra's subduing of Holofernes is clearly visible. However, certain differences become evident when compared to the later Florence version, most notably in the depiction of blood. In the Rome painting of 1612, Gentileschi rendered the blood spurting from Holofernes' severed neck in a relatively restrained manner similar to Caravaggio's version. Without a dramatic fountain-like spray, the blood is certainly visible, but it appears less splashing than in the second painting. In terms of light and composition, the first work is still dramatic, with a dark background and pronounced illumination. Yet compared to her later experience, it can be said that Gentileschi approached the details here with somewhat greater caution. Gentileschi returned to the Judith composition years later. The second version, completed around 1620 in Florence, is a masterpiece from the artist's mature period. This painting was most likely commissioned by Cosimo de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany and a member of the Medici dynasty. According to tradition, Cosimo II had seen Artemisia's first, Judith in Naples, and was so impressed that he requested a similar work for his wife's art collection. The Florence version, although very similar in composition to the first painting, displays more advanced craftsmanship and a richer level of detail. The artist infused this work with the experience and artistic maturity she had gained over the intervening years. Comparative analyses reveal that the second version contains subtle refinements in composition and detail. Gentileschi's use of light, knowledge of anatomy, and organization of the scene had all become more assured. In particular, the degree of realism is heightened. The spattering of Holofernes' blood, the tension of flesh and muscles, and the nuanced expressions of the figures are rendered with far greater clarity. A dramatic gush of blood, absent in the first painting, is vividly present here. Dark red blood forcefully spurts out, staining Judith's dress and chest. This adds an explosive sense of movement and an additional layer of horror to the painting. In the second version, Judith's sword is positioned more vertically compared to the first. The blade descends almost straight down the center of the canvas, cutting through Holofernes, giving the work a more symmetrical and central emphasis. Many commentators have likened the upright stance of the sword to the shape of a cross, thereby visually reinforcing the theme of divine justice. In addition, in the Florence painting, the relief of Artemis on Judith's bracelet is distinctly visible. The artist may have given this detail deliberate importance. As noted above, the arc of blood spurting across in alignment with this bracelet is a detail unique to Artemisia's iconography. From a technical perspective, although the second painting is slightly smaller in size than the first, it conveys a far greater intensity of energy. The closeness of the figures creates the impression that every corner of the canvas is filled. In terms of color palette, Artemisia once again employs deep reds, luminous flesh tones, and a dark background. In the Florence version, however, the hues appear somewhat richer and the contrasts sharper. The light is also more deliberately concentrated on Judith and Abra. As a result, the viewer feels as though they are gazing at a closer, more searing scene. An interesting anecdote about the history of this second version is its arrival in Florence in 1620. Which caused a minor shock in court circles. Records indicate that the work was initially considered excessively savage, and for this reason, it was not displayed prominently in the Uffizi collection, but instead kept in a secluded room. Artemisia Gentileschi's Judith slaying Holofernes is not just a biblical scene. It is an emblem of female power, the pursuit of justice, and the Baroque language of drama and intensity. In conclusion, Artemisia's Judith beheading Holofernes paintings are masterpieces that move the viewer deeply not only through their technical mastery but also through their narrative, symbolism, and emotional impact. Rich in storytelling and academic depth, these works contain enough detail to be discussed at length, even within a 10 to 15 minute video. In conclusion, Artemisia's Judith beheading Holofernes paintings are masterpieces that move the viewer deeply not only through their technical mastery but also through their narrative, symbolism, and emotional impact. Rich in storytelling and academic depth, These works contain enough detail to be discussed at length, even within a 10 to 15 minute video.